What's the best way to dry your plants and keep them as high quality as possible? That's what we're going to be talking about on today's video. But before we do, today's video is brought to you by Real Growers Grow Dots, the easiest way to feed your high-value plants. You mix Grow Dots in once at the beginning of your grow, and they feed your plants all the way to harvest. You don't have to worry about nutrient burn or nutrient lockout. Grow Dots does all the hard work for you. Check them out over at realgrowers.com. And while you're there, use coupon code Scotty420 to get 20% off your first order. Now let's get back to the show. Come on, High C. We got it. Now we just got to dry it.
All right. So assuming we grew some really dank cannabis plants.
Yes.
And it's time to harvest them. What are your 3 or 4 best tips for keeping all of that high quality terpene, trichomes, all that stuff we work so hard to get? Let's keep it on there as we dry them.
All right, so the biggest thing that we're going for here is slowing down the drying process. When you slow down the drying process, you're letting the plant metabolize and break down specifically that chlorophyll. There's a couple other things that are going on there, but it has to degrade that chlorophyll. And anyone that has dried cannabis for a couple days, 2-3 days, and put it in the pipe, oh, you'll notice it doesn't have that good taste. It has a grassy, I don't know how else to define it. I call it a green taste, and that's the chlorophyll.
So I've smoked cannabis that was dried in 3 or 4 days. It made it to the point where it was smokable, but yeah, it had that really harsh, grassy green taste to it.
So slowing it down is what we're going to be talking about. That's a big point of drying. So one of the biggest things that I like to do is I keep the plant intact as much as possible. So I'll keep big old branches and I'll keep the leaves on them. There's controversy. People say the leaves, chlorophyll moves or whatever. I don't believe that whatsoever. I grow great cannabis, and it's great when I smoke it, and I leave the leaves on there. I call them roll cages. So those trichomes are they're balls on the end of a little stick. It is very easy for them to break, and that's where all your cannabinoids are.
So you don't wet trim your leaves. You wait until you're done with your drying process before you trim your leaves off.
Yes, definitely. I'm looking to hold as much moisture as possible in there.
And protect those trichomes.
Yes.
Okay. I also noticed a difference. You mentioned as much plant material as possible.
Sure.
I've seen people, and this is the way I used to do it, was just snip and kind of make like a wishbone and cut a bunch of different wishbones off. But you just go like, you have the whole branch.
I have the whole plant sitting there about 5 feet away.
Okay.
I've got a whole plant hanging, just cut at the stem. And the idea is, have you ever seen how much moisture is in that stem? Let all that moisture, you're trying to dry it.
Just slows down the process.
As slow as possible. So, just keep there. If there's the more moisture that is in that flower, in that stem, in those leaves, all of that is going to slow the process down.
And you said slow it down to how much? Because we mentioned 3 or 4 days. You can get it dry that fast, but you don't want it to dry that fast.
No.
How long should we be aiming for our drying process?
And now people are going to be yelling at me for this because, it's connoisseur. If you can do it for up to 2 weeks, then the chlorophyll has broken down at that point.
Okay.
You do that by lowering the temperature. So if you're going to do it for 2 weeks, you better be close to 60 degrees and right about 60% humidity. That's just the general rule of thumb, 60-60. Most people can't. It's pretty tough. We're in this room right now. We can get it down to 68, maybe 66. It's going to be tough to get it down to 60.
Air conditioning.
Yeah. What I'm saying is I don't normally get mine down to 60. I make sure my humidity is in check, though. For me, that's the biggest thing.
And
my weed tastes good, by the way.
It does. During bloom, I'm going to drop my humidity down to like the 40s. But then once I go into drying, I'm going to want my humidity back up into the 60s.
Yeah. And don't forget, even if you get like a little drying tent, this is giving off lots of humidity. So it's easy to keep a tent. We're in Colorado here. It's very dry. It's a lot easier to keep a tent humid and up to 60% humidity.
And so depending on where you're at, you might need a humidifier or you might need a dehumidifier. Yes or no?
Yeah, I think yeah, in a tent, yeah, you might. I wouldn't overthink this. If we're just trying to get good smokable cannabis, I wouldn't overthink it. I have mine in a bathroom over there. If I did need to keep a humidifier on, it wouldn't be too tough.
Okay, humidity and temperature, and you were talking about the terpenes, protecting them with the roll cage leaves.
Yeah.
I've heard you mention before volatilizing. Can you explain what that means?
Volatilizing is going from a solid to a gas, skipping the liquid stage. That would be evaporation. It's a fancy word for losing your terpenes. And the higher the temperature, the more terpene loss you're going to get. I mean, terpenes volatilize off at 200, 300 degrees when you Google them. Man, they start to volatilize off. Something changes with them right when they get to 75, 80 degrees.
Yeah, so if we're not keeping that 60, 68 degrees, if we go above that, we run the risk of those terpenes, those trichomes, just kind of volatilizing off.
Absolutely. And don't do it too cold either. If you do it too cold, it'll never dry.
Okay. Last question that I have.
Yes,
I see a lot of people when they dry, when they're hanging their stuff, they do it in a dark place, like a zipped up tent or a closet with no light coming in. What's the deal with that?
Heat and light degrade terpenes. So we're trichome farmers here. we're farming terpenes and cannabinoids here. So we want to keep those as intact as possible. So light degrades terpenes, heat degrades terpenes.
Okay, so I've got my temperature in check. I've got my humidity in check.
Right.
I've got them in a cool, dark place. I let it dry over 10 to 14 days.
Right.
Now it's time to test it. How do you test to make sure that your dry is complete?
You're asking a guy that likes to smoke weed. How to test it, all right?
Okay.
I'll take it and put it in a jar when it's ready. You do a little squeeze test. You can kind of tell, but you cut it off the stem. You put it in a little jar. You fill it up, 3/4 of the way or something like that. Let it sit for a few hours. Let it sit for the afternoon, 4 to 6 hours. That's all it should take. The moisture inside the flower is going to equalize and go all over the flower. And so when I take that, put it in a grinder. You can immediately tell as soon as it goes in a grinder. You can tell
if it's drier.
Yeah, it sticks to the grinder and all that stuff. And that's really the way to tell. I will go the extra mile and try to smoke a joint out of it. I call it the joint test. If you can smoke the joint and the ash is burning clean, the ash is burning gray and not just totally black, if it doesn't want to go out every time that you have to keep hitting it, and that's when you know. But you know what? When you get there and you're like, hey, it almost smokes right in a joint, that's when you're ready to put it in your jars and start doing that last little bit of burping. You don't want to lose all that moisture. You want to keep that biological activity going on in the leaf. So you don't want it to be bone dry because that'll stop everything. But that's when they talk about the cure. At that point, you're putting it in your final jars or your jars, and then they call it burping. You're opening it every few hours. You're just putting the finishing touches on there. You're smoking a lot of joints over those 48 hours. And then that's when they talk about, we don't have to get too deep into it. That's when you get into curing, though. And the curing is just keeping that enough moisture in there to keep biological activity going while you're putting the finishing touches on that drying.
All right. So temperature, humidity, let it go for at least 10 days.
Yeah.
Do a good curing process at the end. And
Sure.
that's the way you get the most out of a good harvest.
I think so. I think if I gave you that advice, I'd be happy with it. Yeah. If that's just me, that is how I do it. But what about you? What is your best tip for drying after harvest? Let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, please smash that like button, hit that subscribe button, and check out the other couple videos YouTube's recommended for you. I think you're going to dig them.